This episode is sponsored by Turn Gymnastics Apparel, the brand dedicated solely to the sport of men's gymnastics. Choose Turn this season to outfit your team with industry-leading design concepts and elevated options for elite performance. Get the design process started today. Visit turn-gymnastics.com to discover the latest possibilities. Turn. Never done perfecting. Thank you, Turn, for supporting the Sam Oldham podcast. Supporting Turn helps us bring you new content every single week from the world of gymnastics. I hope you enjoy this episode of the Sam Oldham podcast.
In early August 2025, the US Gymnastics Championships took place in New Orleans. It was a trial for the World Championships that take place next month in Jakarta. Kensley Behel of Neutral Deductions is joining me today. She reports on the sport of men's gymnastics. She saw all of the performances at the US Championships, where the athletes were competing for national titles as well as those World Championship spots. Today we're going to talk about the World Championships, the performances at those US Nationals, and Kensley has just won an Emmy for her role with the NBC broadcasting team at the Paris 2024 Olympic Games. Kensley, thank you for joining me. This is the first time we've had a little catch-up since May, I think was the last time that we did this. A lot has happened in that time. Before we get into the gymnastics, it was Sam who told me, do you know that Kensley's won an Emmy? I was like, really? We were talking about my attempts to stay off social media. Just tell me about that and what that whole experience was like.
Yeah, so the MEC production team is this massive production from producers to the people you see on screen like Larry Hernandez and Justin Spring to the people behind the scenes like me doing the research and giving the statistics of, oh, well, this person needs this in the score to win the Olympic title. And as an amazing production it was nominated for an Emmy, and we ended up winning a sports Emmy, and that means that everyone who is part of that team gets to be an Emmy winner. And that didn't actually used to be the case. It used to just be the producers. So some of my predecessors are actually like a little salty about it because people in my role didn't actually used to get an Emmy, but now we all do. And so it's very cool. It's sitting in my living room right now.
Oh, really? That's so amazing. Oh, if we ever cross paths in person, or maybe we come to the US and we do one of these live, which would be like the dream, right? For me and you to sit next to each other and do this, maybe even commentate on a gymnastics competition one time. You have to bring the Emmy and we'll get a photo like we do with the medals and the Gladiators trophy that we've had from a TV show. We'll have to do that and get that photo. That would be absolutely incredible. And what an amazing achievement. And, you know, for people listening at home, I'm sure a large part of that was the production element that managed to create that incredible moment of Stephen doing that pommel horse routine and the build-up and the fact that there was the clock and the timer, and you were a massive part of that. So, yeah, congratulations. And I'm sure that is, you know, as athletes, it's quite clear. You can clearly see the success in the medals and the achievements and the scores and the results. But maybe when you're working behind the camera and you're working on the production side of the sport, you don't always get that, I guess almost that, not that gratification, but that kind of seal of approval that, you know, you're doing a great job, and it's really cool that you've got that. So that's an amazing thing to have been part of, Kensley. Really cool.
Yeah, you don't go into doing this because you think, oh, I can win a medal one day, right? I think most of us didn't even know that was an option on the table. It was just so exciting to be at the Olympic Games in person. And then when we found out we were nominated and then we won, it was just this whole extra like icing on the cake that was just unexpected.
I think, you know, what's interesting about that is that, yeah, when you don't go into it expecting the results, that's why reality TV sucks after a few series, because the people know that if I do well, I'll get famous and I'll make loads of money. Whereas in the beginning, it's brilliant because there is none of that. It's just authentic, and that's what probably came out of that great piece of production. So, yeah, congratulations there, and it gives you another level of credibility in the job that you do, Kensley. So very, very exciting. We're going to focus on the US Championships that took place in early August. I was in Asia at the time and trying to watch and follow along, and I did so, and have slowly digested everything that happened over the course of that weekend and where that leaves the American team. You are the person to go to talk to about that, Kensley. Just talk to me a little bit about the build-up to the US Championships and maybe the men's program strategy going into these trial competitions, and maybe the structure of the men's program as we head into this Olympic cycle and how you see it.
Yeah, so for those who are maybe unfamiliar or who didn't follow men's gymnastics in the US in the last Olympic cycle, the US program introduced a bonus system to catch up on difficulty scores compared to Japan and China and Russia, even though Russia wasn't actually competing in the last Olympic cycle. And the US ended up winning a medal, and a lot of that was credited to this difficulty bonus system. Now, I ran like a full analysis on it, and I think that there are some mixed results saying that the difficulty score actually ended up helping the execution side of things more than it actually ended up helping the difficulty side of things. But what I think is more important is that the people who are actually in the program have bought into it, and that is actually the key critical part, is that the people who are competing and the people who are coaching within the system believe in the system, and it inspires them to do better. And so like you have to kind of take the quantitative side of this difficulty system versus the qualitative side. And so they have brought this back. So in 2024, they got rid of the bonus system because they said, we want to see how athletes compete under the strict FIG code of points. Now this bonus system is back. And it is pretty extraordinary in how much it actually gives athletes. So the one example I'll give is Asher Hong's Riseg Wong. For that one vault alone on one day, he gets over a point of bonus for that one vault. So over the 2 days of competitions at national championships, he's getting 2 extra points above almost everyone else just for doing his vault. So that's one aspect of what was going on in this world trial process and national championships. The other part of it is, of course, who is going to win the national title, because that's an honor in itself. And I think the preview coming in was, is it going to be Asher Hong or is it going to be Frederick Richard? And I think a lot of people had Fred on the brain because Fred had just won the NCAA title. His team had just won the NCAA team title as well. But what I think people forgot was how much this bonus system was going to benefit Asher in particular. He was going to come in with way more bonus. And Fred had taken a lot of time off. He had gone to train with the Japanese, with the Chinese. He had gone to Africa. He had focused on building a Guinness World Record. So for me, I actually thought it was pretty clear that Asher was going to win, but I would not say that that was the general public's perception. So that was kind of the build-up and preview for these championships.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, and it's really interesting the way that you break down the structure in the last Olympic cycle and how they really focused on that difficulty. And you're right. I spoke to you after the Olympic Games and you said that, you'd ran all of those results and there was kind of a mismatch between whether or not that difficulty had helped the US team win the medal in the end. But there are lots of measurables that are not measurable. And one of them being is just if you're doing very difficult gymnastics, it's the level of intimidation that puts on the other teams, because they're not stupid. They can feel it. If they see another team doing 3 5-2 or 5-6 volts, they see it straight away and they feel under pressure. Okay, we're going to have to hit our routines because they have such a gap, such a difference in terms of difficulty. And that's a factor that plays into things. I remember the World Championships in 2010 when the British team finished 4th. The American team went around with us, I think, in the final. And after the British gymnasts, one of the British gymnasts, a former teammate of mine, did a rings routine. One of the Americans said something to him like, "Come on, guys, point your toes," in like a very sarcastic, you do basic gymnastics kind of a way. So it's really interesting that the athletes feel that. And the British guy's response was the next day he went into the gym and did like the most insane gymnastics I've ever seen him do, never competed it and never did it again. And we were like, why don't you do this all the time? This is incredible. So that the athletes feel that if another team is doing very difficult gymnastics, it can make you feel quite intimidated. So that certainly must have played a role. And maybe that focus on the difficulty in the last cycle, you're seeing it now play out.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's hard to measure, are some of these athletes just this good and they would have done this difficulty regardless. But what ended up happening at these championships is 4 separate athletes tied or exceeded the highest difficulty in the world. So you had Donnell Wittenberg on still rings matched Courtney Tulloch's 6.0 D score. Cam Nelson got a 6.3 on floor, which is outright. He owns the highest difficulty in the world now there. Asher Hong had a 5.6, 5.2 average on vault, which matches the highest difficulty. And then Brody Malone matched Tong Yao Hung of Taiwan 6.5 on high bar. So for the U.S. to say, we have 4 guys who are doing the hardest gymnastics in the world. I can't, in all of my time covering gymnastics in the U.S., I have never seen that. But it's hard to say, is this the result of the bonus system or is this the result because these athletes are just this good and they wanted to do these routines anyway?
I think it's probably a mixture of a lot of things. You've got athletes there that are, in many ways, certainly in Donnell, Brody, very accustomed to doing 10 skills, dropping to 8 skills. If there is that push towards difficulty, they're going to take advantage of that. One thing I was going to ask you, because I saw that statistic that you shared, the 4 athletes that have that highest difficulty in the world or tied highest difficulty. We're obviously now seeing, me personally, in terms of the injury to Lorenzo Bonicelli, I think is the way that you say his name. And obviously the very serious injury he had at the World Student Games on rings, injuring his neck and being put into a coma. And hopefully, from what I read online, he's doing much better and things are progressing in a really positive way. But that's a very serious injury. It has made it kind of hit home just how dangerous the sport is. And maybe that's a factor in pushing the difficulty that the FIG didn't fully consider or anticipate, in that gymnasts are going to push dismounts and they're very, very high impact elements. The risk of high injury is going to go up significantly on those skills because the reality is the incentive is to do big gymnastics and quite dangerous gymnastics, and not everybody is going to be physically prepared for that gymnastics yet at the beginning of a new Olympic cycle, or might have the coaching expertise to teach that gymnastics, right? And we obviously had a similar instance with Donnell Wittenberg on rings and the video that kind of went somewhat viral of him re-grasping the rings doing a triple pike. I just wondered whether there was any noticeable change over the last Olympic cycle in that push towards difficulty in terms of that impacting injuries in the US, or whether you noticed that or not, Kensley. That's just something that's come out. When I saw that injury with the Italian gymnast and someone said it was rings, in my head I said, well, without knowing what it is, I'm going to guess it's a triple back, and it was. So does that make sense?
Yeah, I have not perceived in the U.S. there being more injuries, but I also haven't sort of like run numbers and looked at it. But what I can tell you is that I do know that the FIG Men's Technical Committee has had some conversations about where the responsibility lies in terms of how they have created the code of points. And so there's these 2 different schools of thought. There's the idea of what is the responsibility of the FIG to ensure athlete safety, and then what is the personal responsibility of the athlete to know their own limits. And then obviously, of course, there are freak accidents. And I was speaking to someone who's in the know, and they brought up the idea of Simone Biles' beam dismount from 2019 when she got that named. It was the double tuck off beam. And I think pretty unanimously people agreed that the FIG undervalued that skill. And part of their reasoning for it was people potentially doing more difficult gymnastics than they should just to get that higher level of difficulty. And then the argument then is, well, does Simone deserve to be undervalued because the other athletes could potentially make a bad decision? And so I've had this conversation with so many people of, is it more mats that are needed? But there's also some research that certain types of other sting mats can actually increase injuries. Or is it that we just need to, the FIG needs to set a limit and not increase the difficulty bump for dismounts? Do they need to go back to just a regular element group dismount, not the doubling of the skill? And do athletes need to show proof that they are actually ready and capable of doing the skill? And I don't have an answer, but these are discussions that are being had right now. And so I'm curious, as someone who actually did high-level gymnastics, what is your perspective hearing these different arguments?
Well, it's very interesting hearing what you had to say there about Simone's beam dismount. And I hadn't really thought that, because in the past, I had a real frustration around elements not being valued correctly, in my opinion. And, a triple pike off high bar was an E at one point. And as a 13, 14-year-old, Sergey was asking me to perform this skill. And he was saying, this is going to be this shows the level of foresight he had. He was saying, Sam, at some point, everybody's going to perform this skill. And I was going, huh? 20 years later, everybody is starting to push towards doing a triple pike dismount off high bar, right? It took 20 years to get there. Now it is becoming somewhat of a norm. In terms of which is the right course of action, it's very difficult. How do you tell somebody you're not ready to do this element, or you don't have the technical expertise as a coach to teach this? I don't know how you govern that. It's tricky, right? It's a grey area, but certainly if there are any more instances of serious injury or potential risk of serious injury with the same elements, they do need to be looked at. My issue with rings for a long time was that there was no extra mat. So I would train a triple back on rings, but for my ankle to land on that hard mat with no extra mat on top was just very, very dangerous, because on high bar, the trajectory is not just up and down. You go away from the bar. So it actually takes a lot of the pressure and the force away from the landing. So it's much easier to do a dismount off high bar than it is in terms of the force coming down on your ankle joints to do a triple back that just goes straight up and straight down. And so I would often discuss with Andy Toombs, like, come on, Andy, get the extra mat in. And they did it for 6 months and then took it away back in 2013. So for 6 months it was in place and then it got taken away. I'm not sure why. And after that I was like, yeah, I'm not going to do triple back on that landing. It's way too hard. So I don't know where you go. And the problem is, as a fan, I love it. It's amazing. I want to see big dismounts and big gymnastics. That was my style of gymnastics, and it's the most exciting for people to watch. But I think there needs to certainly be, at least I hope people are having these conversations and sitting in a room and going, right, we just need to be very mindful that we have massively changed the incentive structure for difficult elements here. And if you look at I don't know whether there are any numbers out there, Kensley, but maybe if you were to look at the 10 elements in a routine, what percentage of injuries happen on that 10th element, the dismount? And if that is a much higher percentage or recurrence than the other 9 elements, that should be factored into any decision making. And maybe that's something that they should look at. And maybe this World Championships is a great opportunity to take that data. Let's look at the injuries that are sustained at this World Championships. How many happened on the dismount? How many happened on a tumbling element or a vault? And statistically speaking, in comparison to all the other elements, what does that look like? Because if, let's say, for instance, 9 out of 10 injuries that happen are on those dismounts, tumbles, or vaults, then we need to certainly make sure there's something in place, or that is factored into our decision making when it comes to setting the incentive structure to be doing certain types of elements. Because the FIG are in control of that. Right? They've got their finger on the trigger of, do we promote, you said your favorite element on, for everybody listening before we went live, we were testing the audio levels. Kensley told me that her favorite element on parallel bars was a McCutts. they upgraded that to an E, and everybody started doing it straight away. So they do dictate what elements people are doing. So it's a great question. I don't know the answer. I just think it's something that, and more than anything, if I'm honest, that injury and seeing Daniel Wittenberg, which is an unbelievable save, by the way, like the spatial awareness to try and grab the ring to slow himself down, like doing that in a split second is incredible. It's definitely something that has to be really like factored in, I think, in the decision making moving forwards. And for me, it just needs to be you need to keep an eye on that, because what the FIG don't want is that happening at Olympic Games live on TV, right?
Yeah, I think so. The other part of my life, aside from gymnastics journalism, is I have a PhD in performing arts health. So I actually study how do you make performing arts safer, and gymnastics kind of tangentially falls under performing arts, but also is a lot of sports medicine. And I think one of the things that I see, like looking at the research and things that a lot of other people in the field like Dave Tilley see, is that the FIG has a lot of room to grow in terms of how to make gymnastics safer in terms of their rules. So if you look at the way Uchimura used to land his dismounts or land his tumbling passes, his chest was actually quite low, but is actually considered a very safe position. But that's a deductible position. And so the question becomes like, are we going to look at the biomechanics of the body and what is actually safest for the athletes? Do we actually need to require people to stick? Is that actually the safest for the Achilles and for the knees, or is it allowing people to lunge out of it? And I think that there's a lot of room for the athlete's sake in general to maybe incentivize safer biomechanics in the sport, because it's already so dangerous as it is.
Yeah, it's a really good point, Kensley. Yeah, and as soon as you said that, we've literally just shared a reel that includes Uchimura doing his Li Xiaopeng on vault, and I can see his deep landing with his chest down. As you were explaining that, I could see it straight away. So as a visual representation, that's a perfect one. And you're right. I mean, sometimes another perfect example of this is the way in which they are now wanting people to perform the Gatson. Doesn't work biomechanically, right? So
it does
the whole
not.
gymnastics community have gone, what? That's not even how the guy did the skill. Landing with your chest open and your hands out perfectly, like that's not how. It just isn't how. It doesn't work. The body doesn't move that way. It's, there are certain people that will be able to land like that, but is that, in terms of the athlete's safety biomechanically, is that the best way to land? I don't know that it is, because I never landed like that. And for me and my ankle, after I had my surgery, I would never be able to land like that.
Well, and Jason didn't do the skill like that either.
But that's a good representation of what we're talking about. And maybe that should be factored more into the decision making of, it's not just a case of let's sit down, what elements do we like, let's upgrade them. It's let's really chat to the athletes, the coaches, see the skill, talk to the person that invented the skill. They've probably got a good understanding of how it should be performed. And I think maybe that's where they can take things into consideration. But certainly not just talking to athletes that were gymnasts 20 years ago. Who's currently a gymnast right now that is physically feeling the effects of these elements? Because the reality is the sport is in a very different place to where it was 20 years ago. You could be a top all-rounder in the world doing a double twist on vault 20 years ago, 15 years ago even. Now you've got to do a triple twist or a dragolescu to be competing in the all-around. So, that's definitely a room for improvement. Very interesting talking point. And something that is very interesting because of the focus on the difficulty bonus that you have there over in the US and that structure. And it's certainly paying dividends. Whatever the reasoning for it's working, right? Very impressive that it's across a real broad spectrum of apparatus. It's not just, let's say, floor and vault. It's, floor, vault, rings, and also high bar too. So great for the team in the US. Let's go gymnast by gymnast for this part, and we'll look at the main athletes that were contending and also the ones that have qualified. We know the American team now. I want to touch on those, Kensley. So all around, Asher Hong came out on top and won. Maybe just take us through what the standings look like after day one and their performances heading into day two.
Yeah, after day one, Asher was so far in the lead that there was unless he imploded or got injured in a major way, he was definitely going to win. And then Colt Walker and Fuzzy Bennis rounded out that top three of day one. I think for me, for Asher, what impressed me the most is that he not only brought upgrades, but this is one of the first all-around performances that he has done in a very, very long time. He did not compete all around through the NCAA season. He didn't compete at NCAA championships because Stanford was trying to maximize their lineups, and Asher is a little bit weaker historically on pommel horse and high bar compared to his other events. And so he came out of the gate to do this and he hit all of his routines. Like I said, he upgraded his dismount on parallel bars. He added the full end double back. He also upgraded on high bar and came out extremely strong. And I wanted to ask him, like, where, and in some ways, like, where did this come from? Because his all-around performances in 2024 were, I would say, less than what he is capable of. And here at this competition, he exceeded in many ways what I thought he was capable of, even though I know that he's a great gymnast and has placed in the top 6 in the world before in 2022. So for me, there was just no comparison. He was the star of the show. Everyone was watching him, and his scores reflected that.
Yeah, I think when I look at, I don't mean, this is no disrespect to Asher Hong's gymnastics, but I grew up watching Vitaly Sherbo, Alexei Nemov, Kohei Uchimura, Hiroyuki Tomita, all of these gymnasts were maybe slightly taller, slightly more slender, that had a certain way, an artistic way of doing gymnastics. So I look at someone like Asher and I go, right, if you're going to impress me, you have to do something pretty impressive, because that build is not what I have in my mind as an all-around champion. But when I watched his gymnastics, my takeaway was that actually his technique and his line and his execution looked like, to me, it had improved a lot. Yes, I'm impressed with his difficulty, but he's always been able to do very difficult gymnastics that relies on a lot of spatial awareness and power and your ability to produce force. But it was the way in which he performed that gymnastics that stood out for me, that made me, for the first time, go, you could be competitive in an all-around competition, actually. And that style that I saw a noticeable change in my personal opinion, I think would do very well internationally. And sometimes that style of like powerful gymnastics doesn't always translate onto the international scene, because you have lots of traditionalists, particularly in Eastern Europe, that have Alexei Nemov as their like pin-up and they're always looking for that to be replicated in the style of gymnastics. Does that make sense, Kensley? And that was my big takeaway. But having chatted to a lot of the guys that have gone from competing on 10 skills back down to 8, and asking them what they feel are the most important characteristics for a strong gymnast, just overall in general as an artistic gymnast, but specifically this Olympic cycle, nearly every single one of them have said spatial awareness, which has been interesting, because I don't think in the past I would have maybe picked that out as being one of the key things that you have to have if you want to be a great all-around gymnast. But Asher Hong definitely has that, and he's exploiting that strength of being able to do a full in back out on parallel bars and a back in full out on vault and Cassina. They're all spatial awareness type elements, and he's got that strength and power too. So I think this code is absolutely suited to somebody like him.
I completely agree, and I think people have forgotten how good Asher is, and in some ways people see this as a breakout year, but I think, as I mentioned before, in 2022 he was top 6 in the world in the all-around, and as a junior it seemed like almost unbeatable, and had an amazing coach with Tom Meadows at Cyprus, and before he was at Cyprus, he was at Wogo, which is sort of known for having really good form. So he kind of had this young integration of having very good form, and then went to Tom Meadows, who is kind of like this superstar creator who was able to help guide him through the big skills. And then, Stanford obviously has a very robust program, and it just seems like it's all coming together for him at the senior level. And he is very, very competitive in the all-around, and I don't think that people should count him out for a spot on the podium. I think it would be a little difficult considering like where the Japanese are scoring right now and where some of the other Chinese athletes have scored. And we'll see if Russia actually gets to come back, because they are saying that some of the Russian athletes are going to be able to come back. And then is Jake Jarman going to do, the all-around things like that. But he's incredibly competitive, and he's a brilliant gymnast. And this is I don't think this has actually been released yet, but his family is actually from Jakarta, Indonesia. That's where his mom grew up. So this is actually going to be a homecoming of sorts for him, where his grandparents and his family who live in Jakarta are going to be able to be there and cheer him on. And I think that adds sort of like an extra boost for those athletes.
That's one of those classic NBC fluff pieces, isn't it?
I did actually send that already off to my NBC colleagues, and I was like, you should make a fluff piece out of this.
Brilliant. No, I think you're right. I think that he has a real shot, at challenging for that podium. Jake isn't going to do all round from what I understand. So I would say, looking at the lay of the land, he'd be one of the favourites outside of the Japanese and Chinese. Typically, quite often, 2 Japanese or 2 Chinese might make a podium. But if anybody's going to split them, I would put him as probably one of my front runners to do that. So that will be super exciting. Do you know what it is, Kensley? I think he goes under the radar because most people just go, he's a specialist, and then move on. You know, it's a natural thing to do. You go, all right, okay, he's strong on rings, vault, floor is pretty good, and you just don't maybe take him seriously in the all around. That is somebody from another countries who doesn't see him as often as you do and definitely doesn't follow the college system. I imagine that would be like the initial reaction would be, oh, I forgot that he came 6th at the Worlds all around. It would just be that, oh, he's great on rings and vault and floor, but yeah, don't think he's very good on P-bar or high bar, so I just kind of don't consider him a serious threat. So that might be a real advantage for him going into the World Championships. And again, that's no disrespect to his gymnastics, and I was incredibly impressed. And actually, I think, if he can maintain that level on his events that are considered the weaker events, I think it'd be very difficult to take his spot out of the team over the next 4 years. And he's an Olympic medalist now, right?
And I don't think he would take offense to that. He is one of the most confident athletes I have ever worked with, but not in a bragging disrespect. Like, he just has this quiet confidence where he is very assured of himself and what he is capable of, and he is able to rebound really well. Like, he had a fall on day 2 on high bar, and he competed the rest of the competition as if that had never happened. And so I don't think any discussion of him really affects him, to be completely honest.
Yeah, and they're the most dangerous athletes, the ones that are quietly confident. Tell me a little bit about Frederick Richard then. You touched on the year that he's had so far, and for me, just watching his performances, I just thought he just wasn't that well prepared. And not that he hadn't put in the preparation, but I think even himself, he said that he added a triple back in 2 weeks before the competition. Like, in a skill like that, I can see somebody as talented as him doing just 8 skills instead of 10. I can see why he would do that, but I imagine Asher had been doing those routines for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, and he just looked very, very well prepared. Whereas for Fred, it looked like he's still trying to figure out the construction of some routines, and like the rings construction didn't quite look quite right to me, or like completely natural, like he had it figured out. So I think it was just a case of he's spinning so many plates at the moment that maybe he was hoping that he could get away with spinning all of those plates and just getting onto the team, and then once he's selected, then he goes for it. But yeah, I'd like to know what your thoughts were. It certainly looked like he's from day 1 to day 2, that competitor mindset that he's got and his ability and talent really showed. And the day 2, he looked great. But that was kind of like my takeaways from watching the competition. What about yourself, Kensley?
Yeah, he definitely was not at his best at this competition, and it's really hard to say why an athlete isn't their best at a certain time. Is it that it was underpreparedness? Was it an illness? Was it traveling too much? Was it balancing too many things? It's impossible to say. And I think, for Fred, these competitions have more to do than just the results of the competition themselves. Like, he is a professional marketer, and he is his entire livelihood is promoting himself through these events. So not only was this competition about maybe trying to win the national championships or trying to make the world championships team, but he was also here in a brand new uniform. He has been trying to introduce and get the FIG to accept a new style of uniform that he is comfortable in. but also he was on a book tour for like promoting his new book afterwards. So like there's a lot going on behind the scenes besides just I am here to compete at the national championships. So while it's impossible to say maybe why day one didn't go as well as I'm sure he would have liked for it to go, the fact is that it didn't. And he ended up quite far down the list, was in no way, shape, or form going to make the world championship team based on the day one results. And yeah, but like you said, he ended up rebounding for day two quite well. He came back way out of the podium positions and ended up coming back to barely edge out Fuzzy Menace to take silver medal in the all-around. But even with that being said, he was like 8 points behind Asher. So that's quite a large gap.
Do you know those scores, Kensley, that Asher got? What did they translate to adjusted for gymnastics inflation?
Oh, gosh. Okay. I did actually run the numbers. I can't remember exactly off the top of my head, but his first day was an 85,585. And he did actually say in an interview that one of the Japanese gymnasts messaged him and was like, that's the highest score in the world. Like, you're better than Daiki. And Asher said, like, no. There's like 2 points of bonus there. And I want to say he was somewhere in the 83 range for day one and somewhere in the like 82 range for day two for Asher. So still very competitive, but definitely not the 85 that we've been seeing from Oka and from Hashimoto this year.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah, I think all of that's fair when it comes to... I also think Frederick's going to he's looking at the whole of this cycle and he's going, if there's a year where I do all of these things and build the brand and kind of the springboard of what will hopefully the next 4 years will look like, this is the year to do it, right? There's no team event. It's an individual year. I think he will have hoped to have been on that team to be able to, again, build the brand, go out there, get his face in front of the TV screens and hopefully try and go out there and win some individual medals for Team USA and for himself. But I also don't think he'll be too disheartened. And I think that was proof in the post that he put out, which, again, he just keeps smashing it with everything that he's doing. He's so clever and smart. And, I think moving forward into next year is the year where, Olympic qualification starts. That's when it gets serious. And that's when I'm sure a lot of the side things he's doing, he'll probably just pull those in a little bit. And he won't do so many. I can't imagine it's going to suit him to stop doing all of these things that he's doing. And I hope he continues to do it because that's how we're going to grow the sport. But I do think he's probably going to look at he will have looked at this year and gone, if there's a year where I can afford to maybe not make the team and make some mistakes, it's probably this first year with it just being an individual year. You know, as an athlete that competed in Olympic cycles, if I'm honest, that individual year wasn't taken as seriously as the years that followed where there was a team event. That's when it gets serious and the selectors are thinking about the team and the makeup of the team. In that individual year, you know, you're just competing for yourself. You're winning medals for your country and there's that expectation, but there is no team event and the selectors aren't looking at you as, could you be in the team again next year or be in the team for the Olympic Games?
Yeah, I think this is my personal opinion, but I actually think that this is probably the best thing that could have happened for Fred leading up into LA. I've talked about this several times on my podcast, and like there are people who are like, yes, you are completely right about this, and there are other people who disagree strongly with me about this. But it's my opinion that the way the U.S. system is set up is it does not leave room for optimal skill development and bumping up the D scores, because what happens is, let's say if the elite year starts in maybe June, you have your qualifier to nationals. Nationals happens in August. There's typically a world selection camp. It didn't happen this year because of the timing of worlds. So that's sometime usually maybe in like September. Then you have world championships in October, November. NCAA season, the pre-meets start in December. Then you go through a 4-month season from January to April. And then you have a month off in May. And so if you're competing that often, from what I have seen repeatedly, there are obviously exceptions to this, but it does not leave room for optimal skill development and growth. And actually, I do know that some of the leaders within the U.S. system have major complaints about NCAA athletes turning down elite opportunities because they want to focus on college or because they need to focus on college, but that's where their scholarship is coming from. And that's where their healthcare is coming from because we don't have universal healthcare in the US. And so there's this tug and pull between the elite system and the NCAA system. So what I see for Fred is he now has this whole window of time open that he can dedicate to skill development that other athletes are not going to have. And I think that's going to set him up really well for next season to be really competitive and be back in that discussion for the World Championship team.
Yeah, 100%. Like, I have no hesitations at all that he's, gonna, given that time and the time to, look, when you get a new Olympic cycle, right? The construction of you, it takes time to figure that out. You will try elements that don't work and don't fit, and you have to find them out. And it's like putting a puzzle together. And when you're an all-arounder, you're putting, now it's changed, but previously you're putting 52 skills together, and they have to all work. And it has to not just work on that apparatus, has to work as a whole puzzle picture of 6 apparatus. You put a skill in somewhere that is so physically demanding, it's then impacting your pommel horse routine when you get around. It's difficult, and you've got to learn the new code and how to play it properly. And I think that's what I was seeing. It was just that lack of time to prepare. That's, I wasn't saying that he didn't prepare, but he just wouldn't. Me being an athlete and seeing all the things he's been doing, he's just not had the time to prepare those. And that, to me, that showed in the construction, because some of the construction looked clunky. It didn't look... He did some of his strength skills, and the way he came out of them, he was having a swing, and it was still figuring... It looked to me like he's still figuring out. In the same way, he did a very different triple back on the second day than he did on the first day, right? So in terms of the technique that he used, it was a different technique. So even that, he's doing that so fast. That's how good he is at those skills. So that's definitely something to think about with him, and I expect him to be completely competitive as soon as we get to Winter Cup next year. I'm sure he'll be game mode on, and the reality is, if Fred wants to achieve what he's aiming to achieve, he has to have the medals and the results to back him up to do that. So brilliant. Let's move on to the apparatus then, Kensley. Let's go to floor, and maybe, Cameron Nelson's been selected to compete on floor, has the highest difficulty in the world. Just talk to me a little bit about his performances and those routines, and I know he's probably going to do vault as well, given I don't know how many athletes can go on each apparatus, but I'm guessing he'll do vault as well.
Yes, he will do floor and vault, assuming vault doesn't sort of maybe add extra pressure to his knees and ankles that would prevent him from doing well on floor. He's a little bit lower difficulty on vault, so he's probably not competitive for the podium there, but definitely could make the finals. So I think it just sort of plays into how it affects his floor routine. His day 1 floor routine was spectacular. So he competed the 2 triple backs back to back on floor, and then he's upgraded his dismount as well, which has given him the bonus for the 6-3 difficulty. He came out of the gate with a 15.201. That's one of those routines that I talked about, very similar to Asher's vault, where he got 1.051 in bonus just from doing that amount of difficulty. So he was looking at around a 14 without bonus on day 1. So competitive to make the finals for sure. His day 2 routine, he actually was a lot less controlled on his landing, and he ended up, I think, on one pass losing about 6 to 7 tenths just on one pass alone, because he took over a 3/10 step, and then he ended up, I believe, with 2 feet out of bounds, and he actually ended up losing the floor title to Asher Hung, because on the same day, Asher did the best floor routine I have ever seen him do in his life, stuck every pass, beautiful form. And so Asher ended up winning floor with 30.016 to Cam's 29.952. So what that meant was Cameron was eligible to be selected for the World Championships team because he had performed the highest difficulty in the world, that 6-3, but he didn't win the event. So he didn't automatically select his spot. So he actually had to wait until the committee decided who was actually going to go to the World Championships team.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, that kind of subtlety in hitting the D score is something that's now been incorporated in the British system as well. So they've added that in now, that if you hit a difficulty, that is one way in which you can be selected. I think that, from what I understand, there were situations in the previous cycle where no gymnasts hit difficulty targets. So that's now been added in as a way that, as some kind of an incentive. The way I read that was that it gives the selectors even more freedom to be inventive with the team that they select if necessary. That's the way my skeptical mind read the change that's gone in there into the selection policy. But maybe a focus more on difficulty in the UK too, and following suit with the American system. Yeah, it's an incredible routine. For me, if I compare his triple back with Luke's, in terms of execution, they're very different, right? Like Cameron grabs the back of his legs. Typically, you grab the back of your legs. It's not a tight tuck. Legs are apart, so then there's a lot of built-in deductions. That suits when he does triple pike, because obviously you're grabbing the back of your legs and your legs are together. But I think, it'll be interesting to see if he can make the final, comparing like those two triple backs together and how that then the final score, what that looks like. But it's an amazing routine. I loved his dismount. It's back in full out. That's my favorite element on floor, is a back in full out straight. So it's a really incredibly technically difficult skill to do your last tumble. Is just, it's amazing. And the difficulty that these guys are doing are incredible. I saw Ash's floor as well. Amazing routine, very clean, very consistent, and certainly opportunities for him to qualify for a floor final with a routine like that. Let's go on to Pommel, Kensley, because at the moment, I personally believe that this is the most competitive apparatus in the world. And in the US is a great example of that. I mean, you don't even really have Stephen, the current Olympic medalist, in a position, again, where he's had enough time to prepare and be super competitive. And you've got, effectively two athletes going, from what I understand, to compete on pommel horse effectively. So that just shows where the US is on pommels at the moment. Just talk to me a little bit about those two gymnasts that are going to go and compete for the US gymnastics team at the Worlds on pommel horse.
Yeah, the US, like you said, is currently stacked with incredible pommel horse workers. It was I'll just touch on Stephen briefly. It was a shame for him to not be able to come out and do his best, but he's had an incredibly busy year with Dancing with the Stars and going on tour and things of that nature. And what I loved about his interviews was he said there were a million reasons for me to not come out and compete, but when it came down to it, I wanted to be here. And I think that's a brilliant message for young gymnasts, is that if you love what you are doing, maybe even if you aren't the most prepared, like, still go out and do the thing that you love. And so while he maybe knew himself that he wasn't going to be one of the front runners this year for the world team, he went out on the stage and he did the best that he could. And so I thought that was a brilliant message. But ultimately, he took himself out of the running basically on day one, because to be selected for the US, you had to place in the top 3. And his score was low enough that I thought he probably wasn't going to be eligible to kind of make that top 3. So the two athletes that are being sent are Patty Hoops and Brandon Dang. I think people know Patty a little bit more. He's competed maybe a little bit more internationally this year. And I think I'm correct in saying this, I don't think he has fallen in a major competition in like 2 years, on which I tell everyone, like, I'm very superstitious, so I'm like, knock on wood if you're listening to this. But that's an incredible statistic for pommel horse, right? Like, that's kind of getting up to like Max Whitlock level of consistency. And so he upgraded his routine. He has been competing a 5.9 almost all year, so he's now competing a 6.0. And he recently did try and get a dismount named for him at the World University Games, but the FIG said it wasn't quite the correct hand placement, if I understand. So here they're revamping it and going to try and get that skill named from him eventually. Okay. But joining him is Brandon Dang, who also competed a 6.0 difficulty, and they ended up being only 0.2 apart in score. So neither of them were able to lock in to an automatic world selection because they needed to compete a 6.2 difficulty to match what Nariman Kurbanov did at the Asian Championships. So they only competed, I say only, but only competed a 6.0. So they weren't eligible to auto-lock that spot, but they were both selected via committee discretion.
Yeah, and it was interesting. I think I saw or read Rhys McClenaghan speak very favourably about Brandon Dang recently. and his style of gymnastics. When asked about the Pommel workers he sees at the moment, that he's really impressed with. So that, I'm sure, for him was a massive confidence boost. But yeah, Patty Hoops and both Brandon doing, they look like that typical Pommel horse worker we're seeing now in many ways. Longer, very good in those support positions, doing sewn elements, Russian elements on one handle, the travels. It's going to be interesting to see what the height of the Pommel horse lineup for the final is, because a lot of those guys are a lot taller now, and it certainly, it felt like it was going that way in the previous Olympic cycle. A lot of Pommel horse workers a bit taller, doing long travels and those type of elements, and it seems to have continued in that vein a little bit in terms of the style of the routines that I'm seeing. The Armenians maybe are a little bit of a juxtaposition to that, and a smaller frames, not as tall, but again doing similar gymnastics. But yeah, Pommel horse is just, it's very competitive.
Yeah, the interesting thing with Patty and Brandon is their interpretation of how they perform like an open body shape versus how it's interpreted by the judges seems to really differ based on the judging panel at different competitions. So sometimes it seems that Patty's form is interpreted as more correct, and sometimes it seems like Brandon's form is interpreted as more correct. And so it's made it a little bit difficult to predict how they will perform internationally, because it does seem like different judges favor or maybe talk about in the pre-meeting, like, this is what we are looking for. And so I'll be interested to see, they're both incredibly consistent gymnasts, so I'll be interested to see how they score in Jakarta.
What do you think the decision was to select two of them, Kensley? What was the thought process behind selecting the two? Not that there aren't going to be athletes competing on two apparatus for the US on other apparatus, but specifically they've both just gone for Pommel horse, right? What was the thinking behind that? Was it just that we consider them both to be the top medal contenders that we have within the team?
Yeah, when you look at the spread of athletes who were eligible, there were only really like 7 that were even remotely like medal contenders, I would say, or final contenders. And for some people, they feel like Taylor Burkhart should have been chosen for high bar over choosing a second Pommel specialist. But I actually agree with the decision that the committee made, because I think ultimately that Patty and Brandon are more likely finalist threats. And like, when you look at the landscape of high bar right now and the Asian gymnasts, I mean, Taylor's a brilliant gymnast, and I never want to take that away from him. But I think that just Patty and Brandon internationally right now are a little bit more competitive. And so it makes sense to me.
And having two guys that strong, if you can get them both into the final, then your odds of winning a medal go up exponentially, right? So that makes a lot of sense. What about them rings, Kensley? Is that the apparatus that Donnell qualified through and will go and compete on? Is he also going to hope to potentially do parallel bars and something else too? Can you just explain that a little bit? Obviously, we talked about his very dangerous fall on his triple pike dismount, which is still mind-blowing that he competed that such a long time ago.
So rings is hilarious because, as I mentioned, you have to be in the top 3 of an apparatus to be considered for the world championship team. So I'm going to kind of like jump ahead to high bar real quick, because Brody, you would think, was chosen for high bar. But because his day one was such a disaster, he actually was not eligible through high bar to make the championship team because he wasn't in the top 3. But he was in the top 3 on Pommel horse and still rings. Okay. So when you look at the rings lineup, you had Asher Hong won the event, Brody Malone was in second, and then Donnell Wittenberg was in third. So Donnell got the D score on still rings day one to be eligible. So he, I believe, needed a 5.9 and he competed a 6.0. So that made him eligible. He would have pretty easily won the event had he not had that really scary fall on day 2. So he again was not able to lock his spot because he did not win the event. So that spot had to go to discretion. Now, Brody's spot also had to go to discretion because even though he hit the difficulty he needed on high bar, he wasn't in the top 3 on high bar. And so they kind of had to do a little bit of like witchcraft to be like, we're choosing Brody for pommel horse and still rings, but really wink, wink, he's going for high bar, right? Is sort of how that ended up having to play out.
Yeah, and that's probably what I was alluding to with the British switch to the start values. You then give yourself more room for flexibility when you're saying, oh, look, see, they hit this score. But in reality, that happens quite a lot, that you will qualify. Effectively, your best shot at winning a medal or making a final is high bar, but I actually qualified for a different route, and it was parallel bars that got me the score. But really, I'm there to compete on high bar. I think that's probably going to be the case with the British team when it's announced with Joe Fraser. So he effectively was going for parallel bars, did a bad routine, did an incredible high bar routine. So it's qualified through bar, but for, so sometimes that's just the way that it go. I had that myself, Worlds 2013. One floor, but I was really like hoping to do high bar. So yeah, sometimes you just have to, it's getting on the plane sometimes is the most important thing, right? Giving yourself that shot. And then when it is an individual competition, if there are enough spots on Apparatus, you end up in a position where the coaches go, what do you want to do? And you go, well, I'll do 3 pieces if I can. And again, that's probably why Stephen, I'm sure he just wanted to have fun and compete, but he was probably going, right, this is a good chance to get out there, shake off the cobwebs and compete in a high-level competition before next year when I'm going to be ready. So any opportunity to get to a major, to compete, I always used to look at it like, yeah, my best shot is high bar, but if I can do a pommel routine and a P-bar routine, that experience is going to be valuable next year when it comes to a team final or interesting that Brody qualified through that rings route and the situation with Donnell, and that he did the highest difficulty in the world. I mean, his strength is so rock solid. It'll probably come down to, there's no reason why he couldn't win a medal. And he typically is very solid with his landings. He's so physically strong. I watch a lot of the guys do that triple back, and I'm like, with him, I'm like, he'll be fine. His legs are so strong.
Yeah, I mean, his on the rings positions are incredible, and this routine is so easy for him. The thing for him is that triple pike dismount, is that it's so easy to over rotate. And I think that we did see that in competition and have seen that in competition before. And so if he can get that triple pike under control and land it well, I would say, yes, he is definitely a medal shot. But I think like some of the very, very top rings guys that we see, like the Liu Yang, the Petronius, the Johals, their landings are just like they stick every time. And that's the medal, right?
Yeah, I think if I was Donnell, I'd go, right, let's try and qualify with a double-double straight, and then I'll do a triple back in the final. And effectively surprise the judges into... There are occasions where judges can get excited by seeing a big skill, and you're given the benefit of the doubt when it comes to the execution. Maybe that would be my tactic. And if that routine is strong enough to get into the final with a double-double straight, and he could stick it, for example, and get that bonus, that might get him in. And then if he does the triple pike, people will be excited to watch it and waiting for it. And maybe that's his best route towards potentially pushing for a medal on rings. Let's look at vault Kensley, because I guess that will be where Cameron's obviously going to compete, but Asher is potentially looking at challenging for a medal on vault if there is an Apparatus where he feels like he could do that.
Yeah, Asher qualified. He was the only athlete to automatically lock his spot into the world team. So even though he's going to go as an all-arounder, he actually locked his spot from vault from doing the 5-6, 5-2 combination, which is the highest combination in the world right now. And then he won the event as well. I think the thing so when you look at the top world scores right now, right, you have the top 20 scores are basically all Archer Dovtian, Jake Jarman and Nazar Chapirni. Like literally almost all of the top 20 scores are those three athletes. And I think Jake and Artur have to be the favorite. They're just so consistent and they're so good. And I think where Asher, while he does the Risei Guang, sometimes he comes off the table to the side instead of going straight up over the top. And so he has a lot of opportunities to get deducted for vault, where I think that like Daftian basically sticks down the middle every single time. And then, Jake obviously does incredibly well.
Yeah.
And Jake has a little bit more difficulty. So, or Jake has the 5-6-5-2 combination. Yeah. Archer has the 5-2-5-2 combination. Yeah. So that's the one thing for Asher where I'm like, the thing that will prevent him from being off the podium is I think where is he coming off the table on the Risei Guang?
Yeah, and again, that skill just typically has mechanical built-in deductions in that it's very difficult to keep your legs together, not split your legs, and landing with your chest low, coming out wonky, step into the side, because the way a lot of the guys do that is they kind of roll their shoulder around the side and it brings in that sideways rotation, whereas Jake, as long as he keeps his legs together when he takes off the springboard, that 3.5 goes straight down the middle. There's just not a lot of deductions in there, similar to Davtian's vaults. But it's going to be interesting. It's going to be a great vault final. In recent years, I really enjoy watching the vault final. I think a lot of those guys have kind of really figured it out now. It's not very often that I'm like, very scared watching a lot of these guys do the vaults. I'm like pretty confident they're going to do well or be safe. Let's look at... is there anybody that will be hoping to compete and be competitive on parallel bars, Kensley?
So I think that the U.S. is going to field 3 guys on parallel bars. I believe Brody, Asher, and Donnell are going to be competing on parallel bars. I don't think any of them are probably going to get in the final. I mean, their scores were just like 14, low 14s, 14-2. And when you're looking at the top scores in the world, I mean, you really need to be above, I think, 14-4, 14-5 to get in the final.
Yeah.
So I think they'll compete. Yeah. I don't think that they will probably make a final.
Parallel bars, to me, has been the big surprise this code. I think the code has impacted that routine so much, and it's brought those scores down like considerably. Seeing people 14, 3, 4, 5 making finals. So it could be a situation where if there are a lot of mistakes, and it just opens the door for somebody to get in there and squeeze them. Courtney Tulloch at the European Championships, great example, right? So, maybe we'll see somebody sneak in there, but that won't be an area of focus. And then we come to high bar. Let's just talk about Brody. Obviously, didn't go to plan on that first day. Again, pulled it back on the second day, hit the routine, 6.5 difficulty. Very exciting routine. I think do you know what you guys are amazing at in the US? And I'm convinced that this is the college system, is finding the little cheat codes. And so that backup rise, straight Jaeger full twist that now everybody's cottoning onto. I've seen in the UK, I've seen people learn it in 1 or 2 days. The FIG will change that rule and say you have to do it from a giant so quickly after this World Championships, because everybody is doing like a hex action into a Jaeger full twist and they just throw their head around the side and it's like cheating the skill. So they'll make a rule that you have to do it from a giant. You watch, that will definitely come in soon. But Brody doing that routine is really, really, obviously he has the pedigree of being a great high bar worker. What did you make of his performances and his continued comeback, I guess, following the Olympics?
Yeah, was a bit surprised by his day 1 routine, if I'm honest. He is often a gymnast that the routine he's planning on performing is the routine he's going to do. And of course, like we see flukes as with every athlete, like qualification at the Olympics last year. But he had planned to do a 6.5 and he only ended up doing a 5.3 on day 1 and ended up scoring an 11.25. So that put him in a really bad position because he had to hit the 6.5 routine to even be eligible to be chosen for this World Championship team. So then he came back, he does the full difficulty routine, he scores a 16.251, with bonus. So without bonus, that's a 15.2, which puts him in second in the world right now, just behind Tang Jiahong. So I think he is really showing, hey, I was world champion in 2022. I won a medal in 2021. I can do it again here. So.
Yeah. And it's an exciting routine. I think it's worth mentioning Taylor Burkhart, like you said, he does really exciting gymnastics. I really enjoy watching his gymnastics. And yeah, me personally was a little bit disappointed that he wasn't on the team because I wanted to see some of those routines that he does again. But I think outside of the guys that made the team, Frederick Richard, I think standout gymnastics was probably my question that I'd ask you next. Was there anything that stood out? I think him, for me, was one that stood out. I think Danila Lakin, seeing some promising signs from his gymnastics. What were the things that stood out for you from the rest of the championships, Kensley?
Colt Walker's day one parallel bar routine I thought was beautiful, and he was actually really poised to auto select a spot onto the world team. So he hit the 5.7 D-score requirement. His work on the bar was stunning. He was like hitting his handstands. He had good flight on some of the I'll call them flight elements. He did take a step on the landing, but he was in first place and then just had kind of a disaster day two. So he actually totally took himself out from even being able to be selected by the committee. And so I think like his day one was quite a highlight, but otherwise was, I think, kind of disappointing for him. The other person I really would like to highlight is Fuzzy Bettis. So Fuzzy is a gymnast that often like flies under people's radar and people don't really know his name and they're like, who is this guy? But he is consistently one of the best gymnasts in the US, and he is so clean, and he doesn't have the highest level of difficulty, but he is a gymnast who hits over and over and over again. And so he is someone I think should be in the conversation for like next year's world team, because when you're in that 3-up 3-count situation, okay, maybe you don't want the guy with the most difficulty. Maybe you want a couple guys with like a lot of difficulty, and then you want that one all-arounder who's going to hit. And then finally, I want to bring up Jackson Harrison. They are a gymnast who on floor brings a lot of the elements we see from Heath Thorpe, incorporating different types of dance and movement and artistry that I think that the FIG is wanting to work towards. So if you haven't seen their routine, I would definitely highlight that as well.
Yeah, what did you make of the U-turns? I just thought they would take the scale out completely as a requirement. I quite like what they did in adding that whole variety of elements to that group that gives you an option of doing different skills. I quite like that. I used to perform some of those more interesting link elements. So yeah, hopefully that does maybe achieve the goal that they set out to achieve originally, but ended up just in a situation where it looked really out of place.
You were part of that group, right, that worked with Carol Angela Orchard on corner transitions.
Yeah.
And like when I think about teams, aside from like the old Soviet teams, but like the modern teams that really brought in like good corner transitions and amplitude and artistry, I think about your 2012 British team. And I think that the British are kind of coming back to that with having Danusha come in and start working with the guys. And I know that the US is now starting to be in talks with some like movement coaches to start getting the US guys prepared for this. And I agree. I like where they're going. I think that they could do more. I have been waiting, and I'm still waiting for an athlete to do a routine to music. It's not against the code of points. And I'm not saying it needs to be like a women's artistry routine, but music is something that like touches the soul and helps connect people. And you could just show your personality very simply by performing a routine to music.
Yeah.
And then your corner transition could be to a beat or something. And I know a lot of the guys hate this, but I think it will go viral the first time it happens.
I think most guys would say, that's more work. I'm already doing 6 apparatus. They've just made my life easier by dropping to 8 skills. Now I've got to add in like a routine to music. That sounds like a lot more work. I think that would be the biggest pushback, if I'm honest. But For
That's what Fred said in the press conference. He was
Yeah.
like, "I already do 6 events, and now you want me to learn more corner
Yeah.
transitions." He's like,
I think that would be the response. Although we did the Superstars of Gymnastics, where all of us did perform floor routines to music. Not that they were in time to the music. We effectively just picked a piece of music and did a floor routine to a piece of music. But yeah, I'm not opposed to that. I do wonder. Okay, like on the women's side, they've done that for so long. They've got that down to an art form. We're already moaning about how long competitions are. How long is it going to take the men's side to be able to figure out how to get I'm just not sure that.
Okay, so here is my big thing with these new rules, right? You're talking about how long the competition has already been. The fact that the judges are now going to have to symbol corner transitions because there's a deduction if you don't do a different corner transition in every corner. So the judges are not only going to have to count up the D and the E and the neutral deductions, but they are also going to have to symbol every single corner transition and make sure that they're different. Otherwise, that's going to get another. And I'm like, this is going to be a nightmare for the judges.
Yeah. It's like, do you know, this is such a strange analogy, but it's like when they bring in a non-native species to a country and it completely ruins the ecosystem and they have to bring another one in to try and correct it. It's the same thing in that they change a rule and then they're having to change another rule to correct they just keep doing the same thing. They need to just think a few more steps ahead so they don't have to do that. That's such a funny analogy, but I know they have that problem in Australia. But it seems like they make a rule and then all of a sudden now it's going to take an extra 5 minutes to judge floor because they're trying to remember, did he do a stag leap with straight legs or bent legs or what legs did he do? And yeah, I mean, that's just not practical, so that won't work. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how they judge that. Amazing, Kensley. I guess just to finish off, how do you see the current state of men's gymnastics as we sit, I guess, towards the back end of the first year of the Olympic cycle?
Wow, that is a broad question. I think I see a lot of it actually very similar to how there doesn't seem to be a lot of difference in like the leaders of the different apparatus than there were from the Olympics, right? So where I think in the women's side, you're seeing a lot more turnover or a lot of the top athletes are maybe resting, taking the year off, right? Like Simone, Rebecca Andrade, like all of those athletes. Whereas on the men's side, you're looking at a lot of those champions planning on coming back. I know Reese has had surgery, but every other Olympic champion, I believe, is planning on competing this year. And I think that that's what makes men's gymnastics so exciting and able to connect with over the long term is because while the women are catching up and we are seeing more longevity in the women's side, the men stick around for cycle after cycle after cycle, and you get to really connect with them and learn more about them and their gymnastics. And that's where I sort of see it. It's just a general continuation from the last Olympics with a little bit better routine construction for the most part.
Yeah, I think I'd agree. I mean, it's hard to know where the teams are sitting, but the British are certainly focused on individual events for this World Championships. No all-rounder's going to go, so it's just apparatus specialists from what I'm being told. So there'll be no all-rounder unless, like we said, Jake is effectively pre-selected, and unless he decides to do all-round. But I don't know that that's going to happen from what I've heard from everybody. So I'd imagine...
That was going to be my one question to you, was I saw Jake and Luke were not on that list, right, to compete.
The individual medalists from the Europeans were given the option not to do the trial.
Okay.
There was a statement made by the new performance director in which he stated, we're going to steer away from relying on a single competition or event being the main contributor towards a competition selection and look at the whole season. So yeah, it was interesting. It was interesting that he came out and explained that and kind of explained the strategy for selection. Nobody's really done that before in the UK. So yeah, I quite liked it. He spoke very well. It gave a lot of information away. So I was like, oh, this is great. I can really have especially the night before I went to watch the trials. So that would be my expectations from, the Russians are going to potentially have individuals competing. I'm seeing like a shift in what I'm seeing online from the Russian team, and I think they've been told, get ready, because there could be a situation where we compete as a team again in the next 4 years. Now, that relies on a lot of politics, but I'm seeing the old guys like Dalaloyan and people start to train and tease at getting back in the gym, and even Belevsky, the same thing. So I'm like, they're getting some kind of information from somewhere that there might be some kind of future in the next 4 years where they're back competing as a team. So, people and teams will be factoring that in. Those decisions are for, it's much bigger than the sport of gymnastics. But if we do see some kind of Russian team in what capacity that looks like, even if it's just individuals, that certainly adds another dynamic into the whole of international gymnastics, the World Championships over the next few years, and the guys that are competitive, because those young Russian athletes that you see doing gymnastics, they're doing some incredible stuff, like the difficulty that you're seeing coming out of there. So yeah, it's going to be really interesting. I think it's going to be an interesting World Championships, an interesting 6 months. I think next year is where it starts to get very serious and it gets exciting. As soon as there's team events, that's when I get excited, and Olympic qualification starts. But I think, it all looks very, very exciting at the moment, and I'm enjoying watching the sport. I think the changes to 8 skills have certainly made it more fan-friendly. I think for someone watching that's not a gymnastics fan, they can quite clearly see that a triple back off rings is good and exciting, and it makes it a bit more simple, right? You see a back in full out off rings, and then you see a triple back, you go, well, that's definitely better, because that's way more difficult because there's more going on. So I think that's cool. My only concern with that is obviously the increase in risk attached to it. But I think it'll be an interesting World Championships. It'll be exciting. A World Championships out in Asia. I was just in that part of the world doing some coaching. Gymnastics is so big over there. I think hopefully we can continue to do this, Kensley. Are you going to have any involvement in the World Championships? Do you know this far out? You're just going to be obviously back home. Like you said, you're going to be pretty close to a due date, I imagine, will be not too far away, maybe a couple of months or so. So, what are your plans for the Worlds?
Yes, I will be pretty close to my due date at that point, so I will not be traveling to Indonesia to go cover it live. My plan is to try and cover it remotely, but as with all pregnancies, as you experienced with Connie, like things sometimes go to plan and sometimes don't. So I'm asking for some grace and patience as I'm still figuring all of this out. And but hopefully we'll be able to produce some level of content during these championships. Oh,
amazing, Kensley. I'll be following. For anybody listening that's not come across your content before, Kensley, can you just remind people where they can find it and the best place, I guess, to follow the work that you do? I use it as one of my, to be honest, it's my top resource when it comes to podcast research. I've advised Christian Thomas to use it when he's come to me and said, where should I be going ahead of the European Championships or the British Championships? And I was like, go to Kensley. She'll give you all the data that you need. So where can people find you, Kensley, and follow you as we build up towards this World Championships?
Yeah, so on my website, neutraldeductions.com, I will typically have all of the schedules and links and how you can watch things of that nature. On YouTube, which is YouTube at Neutral Deductions, that's where I will be putting up some pre-World Championships interviews for you to learn more from the athletes themselves. And then on Instagram at Neutral Deductions, that is typically where I am posting graphics to do with like who is the top scores in the world, so you can sort of know the top names. And then on Twitter or X at Kensley Ann, that's where I'm typically like live blogging and giving my opinions live. So whatever floats your boat within that realm, that's how you can follow me.
And also, not to mention your podcast as well, Kensley, which I can tell you a lot of the top guys in the UK and a lot of coaches listen to it. So it's doing great. So keep doing it. Even me, I do too. That's how I keep up to date, because like I said, I'm not on social media too much. I try not to be on it, so I miss things a lot. So keep doing the great work. Hopefully we can keep collaborating. Congratulations on the Emmy. All the best with the rest of the pregnancy. I hope it goes smoothly. Ozzy goes to gymnastics tomorrow for the first time, so I'm staying well away. It's nothing to do with me. Connie can take him. My dad is very excited because he works at the gymnastics club now. And Sergey, we took him to the gym last week because Sergey was at the gym with the Irish team. And he rang me and said, "Sam, where are you?" I was like, "I'm working." He was like, "Come see me, please." I was like, "Okay, I'll try and get there." So I took Ozzy and Connie, and he was so excited. I was like, he's definitely looking at Ozzy and like, what kind of build has he got? Can he do a hand? And Ozzy's like, keeps practicing he basically does a downward dog with one leg in the air and does a handstand. I didn't teach him that. He's done it of his own accord, I can assure everybody. But yeah, he starts his gymnastics tomorrow, which is cool. But yeah, you've got all of this to come. And thank you for joining us again, and all the best with everything over the next few months.
Thank you.